Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody out there in podcast land. You are in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza, and I want to give a shout out to all of the families out there who had their family reunions canceled this year. I was one of those people in the middle of it, and I am deep into tons of citations, what have you, back in history for our family tree. And I have some photos, which are great. What would be even better is if I had some autobiographies. And so where our ancestors may have missed out in the past, we have an expert today who is a guided autobiography facilitator. So we're going to talk about developing an autobiography so that our family members in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years past today, which is hard to imagine, they actually have more than just our beautiful elementary school photo. And so our author is Color Your Life Happy, Create Your Unique Path, and Claim the Joy You Deserve. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guided autobiography facilitator, Dr. Flora Brown. Welcome to the podcast, Flora.
Thank you, Hamza. So wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, indeed. And when we first got together, I do want to cover this part because it's Dr. Flora Morris Brown. And since I graduated from Clark Atlanta twice, and we have such an affinity with the Atlanta University Center. So when I saw Morris Brown, I was like, "Oh my goodness, we have lineage here." I'm in the middle of doing this. And so you kind of let the air out of my balloon a little bit. You said you weren't part of that family.
Sorry.
But my second part of that was part of the difficulty in at least my family tree, or at least others that I've spoken with, is the women. Because in the United States, once a woman gets married, as a generalization, she takes the husband's name. And so when you're doing your searches, or when I'm doing my searches, it's like if all we have is her married name, it's difficult to get the maiden name. So is Morris a maiden name, and it's easier to find you in the Brown family tree?
Yeah, Morris is my maiden name. So, yeah, that makes finding people difficult if you don't know both names. Some people hyphenate them, but I find that hyphenating can be troublesome because some people will file it under M, some people will file it under B. So I don't hyphenate. I just let Brown be my last name. But I use the middle name Morris because that's my mother's married name, and a lot of people who know me from, the old days, that's the name they identify with. So just make it easy for everyone.
Yes, indeed. So for everybody out there, you know what? And the other thing I found is when you start dealing with the mother's maiden name and then the father's family name, it really shows how we're all related. It seems like at some point, I think we need to bring back the blood drop when you get married, because you don't want to marry your distant cousin.
I know. Isn't that kind of scary? And that could very, very well happen, couldn't it?
Yes. And let's hope it doesn't happen. I hope this is just a theory conversation we're having. So I don't want anybody to go back and like, oh, my God, I only thought this happened in this one state that is the stereotype. It can happen all over now.
Right.
Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. And that's part of the benefit of having a life source, having access to your family's details, because that can help prevent that. But it isn't always available for people of color, especially those of us who are descendants of slaves, because the written record wasn't available. And, in some cases, people, of course, couldn't write and read at first. But even when they began to, it was not always safe to write things down, number one. And number two, once people got out of that horrible situation, and it's true around the globe, wherever, if you talk to Japanese who were interred in internment camps here in California, if you talk to Jewish people whose families were in the Holocaust, some of those family members do not want to talk about the horrible past. They want to forget it, push it down, push it back. But we need that history. We need to know that, those of us who come after. But it's not so easy coaxing it out of people. It's easier now than it used to be.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And a shout out to my favorite man in the whole world. I got to give a shout out to Clarence Capers Sr. And because of, just like you said, I wanted to respect my grandfather's wishes and wait until he passed. Because when I was talking to him and Grandma, when you come out of in school and you're excited, everybody's talking about family tree and what have you. And they were like, we don't want to dredge any of that stuff up.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, but I think the other thing, like you said, it's really important because you can kind of piece things together. And one thing that we're seeing in 2020 is so much is coming to the forefront that was hidden. And
yes.
one argument that we've had when you're talking about people of color, specifically descendants of slaves, a lot of those stories, either you didn't want to share them or for fears or whatever reason. But if you didn't share them, then someone else can kind of commandeer your story. And you're like, that didn't happen. That wasn't true. So I think, I don't know if I'm doing your work for you, but did you come across some of these same conclusions to become an autobiography facilitator?
Did I come across some of these? You mean, did these lead up to me wanting to do this work?
Right.
The various people. Okay. In my case, I wasn't interested in helping people with their autobiographies at first. I was a writer myself, a teacher. When I retired from teaching, I was gung-ho to try all kinds of adventures, first traveling. But then after I traveled for a couple of countries, I decided to write my book. Well, once you write a book on anything, people around you want you to help them. They're mystified. To many people, an author is this, wonderful person that has this mysterious skill, and they start asking you about writing books. So I started off by helping aspiring authors to write their stories. They did not have to be life stories. But what happened along the way, for whatever reason, I started to not feel as fulfilled helping aspiring authors, because that's one path that's very different from writing your own memoir for your family. So along the way, I'm always researching and reading almost everything. If a piece of paper blows down the street, I'm reading it to see what's on that paper. So I ran across a class in one of the community service catalogs that said autobiography or guided autobiography class. And I was like, what is this? Why haven't I heard of this before? Because I was an English major, and I taught English and reading and critical thinking. I helped authors get their books published, but I hadn't heard of this. So when I investigated it, I fell in love with it because it was created for the ordinary person who wants to write his or her life story, primarily about yourself and your family and, from your perspective. But I fell in love with it because I thought these are people who come forth, they want to write their stories. It's very personal to them for whatever. Usually some triggering event has happened, that's made them want to at this point. So I got interested I signed up for the training and completed my training. And once I did that, I was hooked on bringing this skill to the ordinary person who doesn't believe that they can write. Some people kind of keep it a secret that they want to write their life stories because they're kind of hesitant that their lives might be boring or that no one will want to read them. But I love giving them the courage and helping them to see that writing your life story is more than just about putting words on paper is more than just journaling. It's actually a legacy you're leaving behind for your children, your ancestors, people you will never meet in the future. And if you don't share some of those feelings, values, thoughts, everyday life, what was it like, what were your ups and downs, then we lose a lot of rich and valuable information that would help the rest of us live our life. So I fell in love with it. I want to point out one of the big flaws with the term autobiography, however, because the professor, this was created by a professor back in the 70s, called it guided autobiography, but what we end up writing in these classes is really closer to a memoir than it is an autobiography, because an autobiography is typically a chronicling of your life events from birth to or as early as possible, where you were born, all those statistical things, all the way to wherever you are at the time you're writing it. So an autobiography tends to be a more factual factual historical document. And that's why many of the quote-unquote great men and women throughout history, when they got to a certain age, they would write their autobiographies, but we would expect them to have some factual content. So if you're reading about Thomas Jefferson, you expect that if he cites certain dates that he was doing this, certain dates he was doing that, what was going on with wars and other kinds of things, you kind of trust it as a historical record. With your memoir, the focus is more on how you, the author, felt about what was going on in your life. And you're telling it from your perspective. So believe me, your relatives and people that you grew up with and around are not going to necessarily agree on everything you share in a memoir, because it's your perspective. So, if you have 5 children in a family and each one wrote a memoir, theirs will be different, because whatever happened in that family, good or bad, is viewed through the lens of the person writing the story. And if you don't write your story, you just pointed out earlier, if you don't write your story, then that means that someone else gets to write your story if they choose to, or to tell about you, and you lose the power and the ownership of your story. And think about it. How do we know about what happened in, caveman days? Or how do we know what happened in, China with the building of the Great Wall? We know these things because someone wrote it down in whatever language or whatever form of communication they had. They wrote it and they left clues and specific details and dates. And that's how we know about history. How would we know about anything that has transpired if someone didn't make the effort to write it down? But the common, ordinary, everyday person, and when I say common, ordinary, I'm not putting people down. I'm just saying that isn't their career, and they may not feel that skilled in writing. But no matter what, their stories are precious, because that's an accounting of someone who had feelings, they had fears, they overcame things, they contributed to the world. And we need to know about that, especially the families.
I was playing with you a little bit before we started recording, and as you mentioned, your memoir is talking about what's going on in your life. And in 2020, I think it's even more pertinent because outside of the U.S., it seems like everyone's on one accord, but each state here in the United States is different. So if you're not writing things down, you don't know. I'm here in Georgia. I don't know if what's true to what's happening here is your same truth, right? It's like we're our own different countries. So it seems like even more so we need a memoir for 2020 in America.
Well, you just led me right into what I did this year when I offered my first online version of my life story workshop, which I call, the name I typically call it is Write Your Life Story 2 Pages at a Time, because that's the technique that this professor created back in the 70s to get his students. He was a gerontology professor. He was the founder of the gerontology program at USC back in the 70s. He was the first dean, founding dean. And he was, always teaching courses about aging and gerontology and these things. And he discovered one summer, he was teaching a summer course, that when he got ready to discuss whatever the students were supposed to have read, that nobody had done their homework, maybe because it was summertime, and maybe because it was being held in Hawaii that year. But he said, okay, hold it. He realized that whatever he had assigned did not resonate with the students. They didn't take it seriously. So he came up with this off the top of his head, I suppose. He said, okay, here's what I want you to do. Forget about that assignment. Just go home and write 2 pages about your life and bring them with you next class meeting, and we'll just share those with each other. Every student, everyone got so excited, and he observed how much it moved the students to not just read their life stories, but to see the reaction of the other students in the class to their stories. Because whatever secret you're holding, whatever you're ashamed of, whatever you think is this horrible thing in your family or about yourself, somebody else has something that can match it. You know what I'm saying? Everybody has something that they think is they'd rather keep to themselves for whatever reason. So that was how this method started. But this year, I was set to offer my first online version before COVID-19 came along, because last year and year before I'd been searching for a platform where I could have my materials available for the students to get in advance, and then also have a place we could meet online together in a classroom-type setting. And I had taught online courses at the university, and I'm sorry, not the university, the community college where I retired. But the academic technology is different, from what you can get as an ordinary person or an entrepreneur. So I searched for a couple of years, and I decided I was going to offer it on Zoom before everybody else. Everybody knows what Zoom is now. And so this year I was all set, right? And my course was going to have the same name, Write Your Life Story, except I changed the ending to in 6 weeks, because it helps people to kind of get an idea of how much time they're committing to. But just as I was making my plans, the COVID-19 came along. And that was around, well, we started hearing about it in December of last year or January. So then by February, it started to become apparent that this was not just a passing thing that was going to go away fast, no matter what you heard from other people. It was not going to disappear. So I began to think about my course, and I began to wonder, should I even offer this course now? People are so distracted. I don't know about in your area, but here, oh my goodness, this frenzy or going to the grocery store and buying toilet tissue, and people just stocking up, and it was just a frenzy. So I thought, I don't know if this is a good time to offer my course, but I had been planning it and waiting to get everything in place. So I thought, no, this is a perfect time for the very reason you just alluded to. I thought, when you are afraid, and you are stressed and you're upset and uncertain and all of those things that were going on with us, there's some kind of power that is within you that you can either use for good, or you can go and hide, under your bed until everything's over. So I thought, I'm going to still offer my course, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit, because there was no way we were going to have a course where there wasn't going to be the opportunity for them to share about COVID-19. So I changed the name of it. I tweaked the name of it, and I called it Use the Secret Power of Scary Times to Write Your Life Story in 6 weeks. So I added to the front of it the idea that, yes, we're in, I call them scary times. Some people call them uncertain times, all kind of names. But the point is that within this course, then, I created a journal that I gave them prompts that they could use. And the journal was optional. They didn't have to turn that in to me, but it gave them a structure, a framework to do exactly what you said earlier. Share what is going on. What are your feelings? What's happening in your neighborhood, or in your area, your city, your part of the world? And because if we don't write this down, we will forget the details. And the details are the most important part. You can relate to how you went to Costco to buy your usual groceries and the line was wrapped around the store. And how you felt and what was going on. So those details are extremely important. And so I gave them an opportunity to journal, but the course already has structure because each week we write on a different theme, and we do activities that lead up to that to help them jog their memories and so forth. And it's a wonderful way for people to get their stories done, because there are a number of programs out where you can write your story or write 1 week at a time, send a lesson in, kind of like the old correspondence courses used to be, sort of, kind of. And but this one is different because when we come to class, you read your story that you wrote that week, and we say 2 pages. You can write as many pages as you want. The problem is, in order to get everybody's story read, you need to keep it short. So we can't hear, all 100 pages you wrote, whatever. We want about the first 2 pages. And when you finish, everyone who's listening shares their reaction to your story. Mm-hmm. And this is the magic of this course, because I've been teaching this a couple of years and, face to face. I've taught it in libraries, private homes, different places. When you see how people react to your story, it's something, it just is so gratifying, because you can imagine people are hesitant to share, their story at first. But when they see that everyone in the class is on the same path with them, wanting to share and to be open about and truthful, but they also have to develop, this confidence. We talk about confidentiality. Anything that's shared in the class is not to be shared outside. And this is the magic of it, because people come away feeling so empowered that now they have a way to get their stories written, that they have some guidance, but they also have some group interaction and support. There's nothing like accountability and nothing like support from like-minded people. So that's how I got. So when you say guided autobiography, I don't have that title in my course title, but that is the name of the program, the certificate that I trained under to learn this technique. But before I got into that, I had been teaching for 40 years English and reading and many other things. So I, of course, incorporate, other things that I use in my teaching. But yeah, it's whoever tells the story is the one that rules the game. So if you don't share your life story, all kinds of strange things, it's unfortunate, because there's a quote, I think it's an African quote, and I don't have it right in front of me, about every time an old person dies, it's like a library burning down. Mm-hmm. Because Absolutely. They are taking, and it doesn't have to be an old person. It can be any age person who has lived, a number of years. There are things that they carry with them that perhaps would be wonderful to know about in the family, but also outsiders, people who are not in your family, appreciate you. And, I looked up yesterday about the New York Times bestseller list. I was just curious because somebody mentioned it in something I was reading. And I was looking it up to see, okay, how would they determine that list and da-da-da-da-da. But in the process, the top-selling books are memoirs, autobiographies. Would you believe? That's what people love to read about other people's lives. And now my students who complete my course do not typically publish their stories. That's up to them if they want to. If they want to publish them, then we have a different conversation about how that, in other words, publish it for retail sales. But most of them type them up. They can take them to one of the, print stores and get them copies made. They can even get a decent cover, all kind of different covers on them, or they can go online and hire somebody to design a cover, and it's still, they can put it together and give their families. It still isn't in the public. So that's how I got fascinated with this. And I was especially drawn to it because I know how difficult it is to sit down by yourself and start writing your story. It's just difficult because you don't know where to start. And I even, my oldest daughter gave me a book a couple of years before I retired that was designed to help you write your autobiography. That's what that author, this was not the same man who created the method, but this was sort of like a journal, and each page was asked a question, and you fill in that information, and the idea being when you get this book complete, you could give it to your family as is, or you could, copy those, type them up, and so forth. But even as much writing experience, as much teaching experience as I had, I found it difficult because you had these questions that were, of course, about my life or about life, but they just seemed random to sit and do that. And without a group to share it with, it made it not easy to stick to a schedule and to get it done. So when I found this method, I realized that this is a solution for all those people who want to write their stories, but they need guidance, they need confidence. And it's been a wonderful experience.
Oh, I'm so sure. And I want to ask you a health question since you are in California, because you were talking about memoirs, and if you're during this time when people have so much uncertainty, and with all of the initially when all of the toilet paper was missing, you could see in other aisles where all the vegetables were still stacked and all the vitamins were still stacked.
That's right.
So could they use the toilet paper that they bought?
could they eat the toilet paper? Well, you know what? I wrote an article. I wrote a couple of articles about family, but I definitely wrote one during the pandemic. It's on my website in my blog. I don't know exactly why people went with the toilet paper, but I think it was something about, they identified that with a need. And, of course, people were stocking up the sanitizer and what else was that? Those cleaning products and sanitizers, toilet tissue. It was a thing, and I'm sure psychologists could, delve into it and try to explain why it was that. But you're right. And maybe the fresh vegetables and fruit kind of thing was something that they weren't thinking immediately about because it's perishable. So they were buying things that weren't perishable, and it would keep them physically safe. But you'll have to read my article about I wrote an article about ways to find relief, comfort, and meaning during the pandemic. But I started off talking about the very thing we're talking about now, is the panic buying. And people want to feel safe. And having lots of toilet paper and whatever canned goods and things of that nature made them feel safe and ready for, because we didn't know if we were going to be locked down to the extent that we could not make the choice of going out of our houses or what. We didn't know. And I have a picture in here of course, everybody has a picture in their heads if they didn't take a picture of the grocery stores. It was shocking, and it was scary to walk in a store. If you live in a city like I do, I have 3 major grocery stores near me within one is in 5 blocks and one was a couple of miles. And those stores are always stocked, and to walk in there and see empty shelves for as long as you can see down that whole aisle, or maybe one bottle of something sitting on that shelf, that was a new and scary thing for us.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, but it's something that people they feel like they have to do something. They have to run and hide. Of course, now you also had the fast-thinking entrepreneurs. So there were people buying toilet tissue and sanitizers, hand sanitizers, and cleaning products, and stocking up to, sell people. I guess I don't know where they were going to sell them, maybe at the swap meets on Saturdays or whatever. But then the stores had to make a quick adjustment because they weren't prepared for this. So they started saying no returns on toilet tissue and hand sanitizers. So if your garage is filled with hand sanitizers and you didn't sell them, you cannot take them back to the store. So everybody had to pivot and decide what they were going to do. But after a while, it settled into kind of a thing. But we kept, I don't know, I think it's kind of across the country in America. We had to pivot again because the very day I released my course to make it available for sale was the 25th of May. And you know what day that was. That was the day that George Floyd was murdered. And I say murdered, some people said died, but he's gone from us. And we got to see a piece of it. We didn't see all of what happened, but that changed people's feelings, and it added more fear to our lives because, especially people of color, we already know the story about how vulnerable our Black males in particular are, but we know from our experiences, what it's like to be Black and being possibly accused of something at any time. So that added more. So of course I had to add some content in my journal that I created for my students about that too, about the protesting and the social unrest. And I even found some articles that, weren't in my course before that pertain to systemic racism and the history of eugenics and those kind of things. I added those in the course. None of that is mandatory reading, but it's reading that they can do and we can discuss to help trigger their memories and their feelings about all these things. So my course became different from what it would have been, had these things not happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many questions that are packed into that. I don't know where to start. I do want to cover the eugenics part and it being not being mandatory, but from a I want to put a pin on that one.
Okay.
You were talking about some people were hiding under the bed until everything is over, and so it's really interesting in the States that, because I want to get your opinion on this, in March. Right, the general consensus was, it's going to be over around Easter, which was, I guess, 4 weeks away. And then they kept pushing it back like 6 weeks and a month. And so when our family reunion was canceled, I was still doing it's addictive, right, kind of finding all these long-lost ancestors. And so I was speaking to a cousin that was like 3rd degree removed, and we were having a chat, and we were talking about the family reunion. And on their side, it was also canceled. It was supposed to be this year. but they decided, our family reunion has been postponed, God willing, until next year, right? And with her, this particular person, they said, well, we're going to wait until 2022 to have our family reunion because when influenza hit in 1918, it roughly lasted 2 years. So, you know, when you were talking about eugenics and knowing the history, history seems to repeat itself in certain ways, and if you don't know your history, you're going to repeat it. And I guess that's a greater, right? It gives you, it keeps you in employment because if you're not writing that life story, because when you talk about the eugenics, I know that W.B. Du Bois and those guys, they kind of subscribe to that too. So it's important to read these life stories because there could be a narrative that, you know, only one group of people thought this and, you know, look at those people, but, oh, wow, somebody in our family, Uncle Joe really thought that way. I guess the bigger question is, how big is an eraser in your class? Because what I'm writing down today may not be applicable tomorrow, or I may feel differently about it tomorrow.
Now, what do you mean, how big is an eraser in the class?
Well,
I was
thinking with when we talk with our elders, like one of the popular things for family reunions is get the matriarch, get the patriarch, and film them and ask them questions and get it on tape because they are not used to writing it down. But they have the luxury of looking at their whole life, and they can package and compartmentalize it that way because they've lived it. But when you're in the middle of it, you may think about something different today than you would a year from now. So it seems like a work in progress that incorporates a lot of erasing.
It is, but not, you don't necessarily erase it, because if I talk about how I felt about life when I was a teenager, I can't erase that. That's the way I felt about life when I was a teenager. And then when I got married, had my children, I may have changed my mind about some things. It's just like growing up in a certain religion. Your parents, you know, raise you as a whatever, Baptist, Methodist, Catholic. But as you grow and evolve, you may explore other religions, other ways of thinking, expand your spirituality. You don't go back and erase your Baptist upbringing. I don't. But I have expanded my spirituality as an adult and as a mom and all of that. So all of that is still part of your story. So no, you don't erase it. Even the way you felt about events that were going on, or the information you had about events at a given time may change as you get more information. But you still can share how you were feeling and what you thought before and what has made you change your mind. I think that's very useful information. You know, if you say, you know, I was a Baptist and when I became an adult, I became a whatever. I think that's very useful for people to read. What made you change? What things led you to even seek a change? And then what elements of this new thing, this new religion, spirituality, made you change? And, you know, what are the differences in the features and the this and that? Because my thinking as a parent and as a teacher is to expose you to a wide variety of information, and then you make up your mind. I have 4 children, and each one of them has a little different approach to their spirituality choices. But that's okay because they are adults. I expose them to a wide variety of things. It's like exposing your child to classical music. But they may choose to move into hip-hop when they become, or make their living even from hip-hop, and that's completely fine. So no, you don't erase. You keep all of that information because it shows development and progress and how you evolved. That's very important to find out. And, you know, the Bible is full of stories about, you know, people changing and having their, you know, their road to Damascus experience type thing. So we need to know both. We need to know the progress and the changes over time. So no, we don't want to erase any of that. But things like the anti-racism resources, some were articles, some were YouTube videos. Those were very. Many of the students said, "Thank you so much for including that in this course." Even if they didn't address it directly in their stories, they were just, overwhelmed just blown away by what happened historically. And that was, I wasn't trying to give them a thorough education about all these things because I'm just learning about many of these too. But it did expand because once the social protesting started, there were many white people who were asking us to help them understand how we feel, what is going on, and what things are appropriate for them to do. Because many of them started to worry that they were being disrespectful because they didn't know what was the right thing to say or not say. They didn't realize because they're in their heads and their bodies and their life experiences, and we're in ours. Mm-hmm. And so many people were very pleased and told me, "I'm so glad you included those things in our." And some of those were very hard to watch, but like I say, I gave them. They had set exercises that they had to do, and then they had to choose from one of 14 prompts on a given theme, although they could always create their own prompt. But the other things that they were reading were to give them context, background, give them a glimpse into what other groups have been through historically to help them understand why we are where we are today. Because many people think that one of my coworkers one day asked me, said something to me like, when are black people going to stop talking about slavery? That's been over for a couple of 100 years. And I said, well, I guess when other groups stop talking about their history, that's when we'll stop. That's our history. And unfortunately, a lot of us don't know it. And it's really a big shame because there's a lot of value in knowing what your people have been through. But it wasn't common knowledge. I mean, even the American story for white people is not very well told and very deep because the textbooks are profit organization, textbook publishers, and they write what they think school districts will buy. And school districts buy what they think the parents will tolerate. And if they worry about the parents not being receptive, then they've got, to address it. So they tiptoe around. Everybody tiptoes around this. And children who learn their history in childhood are blessed because probably their parents had what the Jewish kids have, Saturday school. They go to school on Saturdays. And some private families have had lessons at home, just like some homes have Bible study. There are some families that teach their children about their history. Unfortunately, if it's not being taught on a grand scale when we're young, we tend to not take that very seriously. We're just interested in here and now, when we're young. But, it's very important to have access to those, to the history. And because of what has happened, now the guided autobiography facilitators around the world who, have the training like I have, no surprise, the majority of the teachers are white in this group, but there was no discrimination against, anybody could sign up for the training. but many didn't of other races. Now that organization is really clamoring to see how they could be more responsive and what kind of things do they need to change about even how they're recruiting. And they're not actively recruiting because they're not a profit organization. So they haven't been out actively recruiting. People just tend to find them just like I found them by browsing through a community services catalog. But now they are having that conversation and wanting to know, have we been? I mean, a lot of white people know, have we been complicit in all of this because we didn't know this, and now we know. We're learning. What can we do? And there's a lot of good articles about that out there for them. What they need to do. But forget that eraser. And even be careful about what you delete. When you're writing, you can write different versions, of your story, unless for some reason, you have a date mixed up or whatever. You can save the old version as you edit and come up with the one that's going to be the final one. You're not going to get all of your facts in, or all of your feelings and all that you want to say in one memoir or in one story. That's why some people write 3, 4, and more memoirs, because typically a memoir is a slice. If you think about a pizza, let's say with 12 slices, that whole pizza is like your autobiography. But one slice out of that pizza is a memoir, because it takes a part of your life. Typically, you pick some part of your life. Let's say your childhood, and you write about that. Or it can be even narrower, about something very specific about your childhood. And that can fill a whole book, because remember, your book length, your story length is up to you. So we're not talking about writing War and Peace. We're talking about writing on whatever theme you're on until you have satisfied yourself and feel that you have said all that you want to say about that at that time. But you can turn around and write another memoir on some other aspect of your life. And that's kind of where themes that we cover in our class are the typical themes that run through everyone's life.
Mm-hmm. And the other part of that I want to ask you, since you said you can have so many different parts of your book, what should you particularly include in an autobiography or memoir or life story? It makes me think of a couple of years ago, I had dabbled into comedy, and I was doing stand-up around the city and what have you.
Oh.
And it was great. I loved it. It helped me just for sales, just being in front of a lot of people and getting over that fear. But I did notice in my dating life that people were kind of hesitant to share themselves because they thought I would use what I was going through on stage. And so when I asked which you should include for your autobiography, I was looking at your site and I was thinking about the holidays, because just from a genealogy standpoint, everyone's like, yeah, we're family. But when you start breaking it down and you find half-sisters or stepsisters and stepbrothers and all this, it's not clean anymore. And people find out that you're writing this autobiography, and they're like, oh, we can't say anything around this person because you're going to include it in the book. So
That's right.
Are you having two books? Like, one is the public book and then the other one is a posthumous book?
I suppose that's a possibility. My theory is, and I mean, I think other people who teach about writing memoirs would agree, your story is your story. And as long as you keep it on your story, and I think one of the problems people get into when they talk, because other people are part of your story, right? There's no way I can talk about my growing up without my mother and my father and my sisters being involved. But the point is, if I'm writing about my feelings, how I felt about what happened, that's all I'm responsible for, and that's all I really know. It's not my job to say why my sister had the relationship she had with my mother, or why she did some things she did, because I'm not in her head. I wasn't in her head. I don't know. So my responsibility is to tell my side of it. Now, what's going to happen is, this is where people get into trouble. When they write a revenge memoir, when you have someone that you hated for whatever reason, you hold them responsible for everything that happened or didn't happen in your life, they want to then, bash this person, and it just becomes a mean and hateful thing. That's not the purpose of the memoir. But the other side of it is, no matter what you do, if I tell my life story and I decide, okay, I'm not going to name people by name. I'm just going to say a friend or a cousin or whatever. Everybody that grew up with me knows who those people are. So you can try to mask it with, because people do worry about that. They want to give it a pseudonym, give them fictitious name. But people who grew up with you, and nowadays in social media, my goodness, there's so much about your life online. People just have to sign up and become your Facebook friend, your Instagram friend, your follower, all of these things to really learn about you, because people don't realize how much they're disclosing. But you can't worry about how your family's going to feel, or your friends. They may be afraid of talking to you, and you can decide as a stand-up comedian, for example, that you're going to steer clear of those, but that's your rich content, I imagine, to share your relationships with your friends and family. And those who want to stop talking to you, oh well. The one thing I told one of my friends who was from a big family, and her father was famous, and one of her sisters wrote family. I don't know if she called it an autobiography or a memoir or whatever, but my friend said that the family was upset when she published her book, this one sister, and because they didn't agree with the way she portrayed her father and her mother. And so I said to her, well, then you know what? You get to write your book. And you get to portray people the way you saw them. But you can't get upset with someone else for portraying the way they saw things. And the exception is, if someone is intentionally writing the whole thing to attack and, get revenge on this person. But, each person is entitled to write their own version. So you don't like my version? Guess what? It is so easy to write your own book these days. Even to get it published, you can get it up on Amazon within 72 hours of submitting it to them. And write your own. There's no way that we're going to all agree on our experiences. Even though we were in the same family, we had different approaches. So, people might have been worried, but you tell them that you should be worried, because I am going to share my perspective on things. But, as long as you're not doing it, like I say, to get revenge or to be mean or to attack and belittle people just for the joy of getting, paying them back kind of thing. I think that's the kind of the line.
Well, I'm also thinking, not being ageist, right? But if this is our best time, because we can only live in the present, and when you're talking about social media and what have you, from a generational standpoint, there were generations before us that didn't share that information, right?
Exactly.
And so I like to look at it like a 2-year-old, because a 2-year-old's always like, why?
Exactly.
Right? And with older generations, you get little pieces, and that's only after someone passes away. And they're like, well, I didn't have all this information. And somebody was like, well, why didn't you ask? And then the other side is probably protecting. Like, they're probably protecting a family member because they didn't want to share that.
Right.
But you find out at like 30, like, oh, my God, my whole life was a lie. So,
it's kind of scary.
Is it easier now working with clients because they are so more, like you said, all you have to do is follow someone and people are sharing so much information.
They're sharing too much information.
Right. But I don't have my grandma showing her what she ate for lunch today on her social media.
Well, it depends on who your grandma is, because some grandmas are pretty savvy. I'm a great grandma, and I was online with my youngest daughter's friends watching Hamilton the other night. I had seen it. I watched it by myself, and then I was watching it again because I was going to be going to a chat where we were going to discuss it. So I watched it with a bunch of 39-year-olds, and they were all, I guess, late 30s. And it was very different watching it with them than watching it with somebody my age or watching it by myself, because they have perspectives. But I love hearing those perspectives. I love hearing, how they see something very different in it than I see and than I saw. And there are more grandparents and great-grands and all on social media than you think. So, but to get back to your thing about them not sharing, when my mother was kind of the keeper of the family history, quote unquote, but she wasn't writing it down in the sense of what we're talking about now. When I got ready to try to create my first genealogy chart, I did not own a computer back there then, and I just decided, okay, I've got to create some kind of worksheet to start getting these people to send me information. And so I started gathering information from the heads of households, and I made this chart. Well, I knew that my mother had been married before she married my father, been married once before she married my father. So, and she had a picture of this man that she had been married to a short time, and his name on the back. It was his nickname, too. So I was like, Mother, tell me about this guy you said you were married to, and blah, blah, blah. What was his real name, blah, 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 because I need to put that on the chart. Oh, my goodness. She was very forthcoming before this with all the names and stuff. But when I dug into that, she said, he doesn't need to go on the chart. I said, yes, he does, because you said you've married him, so he is your first husband. Well, we were just married a very short period of time, so that doesn't need to be on the chart. That's not important. I said, it is very important. I said, I tried to appeal to her understanding of money. I said, suppose this man died and they're looking for his last wife, no matter how many years have passed. And you haven't identified with him in any way, shape, or form. You're just going to miss out on that money that you were going to get. And she was like, well, I don't care about that. I don't think his name needs to be on there. It's not important. Blah, 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 blah. So, and I had another cousin that called me, and she was upset. And we're talking about just identifying who's kin to who, okay?
Yes.
We're not even talking about the stories that whatever went on.
Yeah.
But one cousin called me and said, I received this information, and you have my father listed as a stepchild, that he was raised by step. I said, well, that's not true. They treated him just like a family member. They loved him all his life. I don't think you should have it, listed as stepchild. Well, I had it listed that way because I didn't really have the official software yet of how to say these things and how to show the relationships. She was so upset, and I said, listen, I am sharing information that other people shared with me. Whether you were a stepchild or not is no reflection on you. It's a relationship so that we can understand those of us who didn't know or, will be left behind. She goes on. She goes, well, my husband and I don't have any children, and so we don't really need to even be on the she did not want her father listed as a stepfather because the parents who raised him had been wonderful to him. Well, that's great. She also probably didn't want me to know that that was her stepfather.
Right.
That wasn't her birth father. And how did I know? Because one of the other cousins told me the story that she remembers that she was at the wedding of this the other cousin's mother and father, and they were about 10 or 11 years old. And she described what they were wearing and the porch. They got out on the porch and got married, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And she didn't know that I knew that, too. But she was so upset. She said, well, just take me off the family tree. And I said, well, you know what? We're not taking anybody off the family tree. I said, if you don't want a copy of it, fine. I said, but we have a responsibility, whoever's creating that chart, to tell the true connections to the best of my ability. I said, the only way I will have lies and falsehoods on that chart will be that somebody told me a lie. You know, so many people love their stepmother, stepfather, you know, because they raised them and they just, you know, would love to have them that be their blood parents. But they're not. And that's okay. But they don't want it written down anywhere. So she and I didn't have many more conversations. But yeah, she was pretty upset. And that's part of the problem when you start showing true relations. And even more amazing is when you go to a funeral and you read the obituary on the funeral program, and at the end, you know how they say she leaves to mourn her her 5 children, blah blah blah. And you go 5? I thought she only had 4 children. Who is this Charlotte on here? And it's like, oh, so you're going to acknowledge them on the funeral program? But nobody knew before this, so that they could, not that she's necessarily going to force a relationship with the person, but it happened, and they're here. They were born. They typically are adults by now, you know. So it gets very tricky, and you're going to have some upset relatives when you start talking real relationships. That's not even getting to the story yet. We're just talking about the tree. But that tree has a lot of interesting leaves on it, okay? And you start shaking that tree, and it's really scary when you have people you were very close to that you grew up with, and you know what happened, and at least you know the timelines. And they have reordered, you talk about eraser, they've reordered the history in their heads, and they convince themselves that, no, this is her father or whatever. That was before DNA testing became easier to do. But yeah, there's a lot of potential minefields when you start this. But that's why you keep the focus on you when you're writing your story, how you felt about a given situation. And it's in the kindest way you can. But the danger of not sharing your true story is it's not forgotten. It's in you, and you're carrying unnecessary weight and pain and suffering inside of you. When you share that, you have released it. Many of us are probably sharing blame for something that we didn't really do or were responsible for. When you expose it, I think Brene Brown wrote something like, shame cannot survive in the light. So when you share something that you feel shameful about or whatever, it weakens it. It doesn't make the incident go away, but it weakens that emotion that was holding you captive all these years. So part of what you're doing in writing your story is getting it out of you so it's no longer controlling or diminishing your life, because that's exactly what it's doing, even when you don't realize it.
Absolutely. So what we've established is everyone has a story, and how do they start? How do they know they're on the right path? I think that they need an autobiography facilitator. And so how would they get in touch with you to get that process going? And also just to read that book, The Color Your Life Happy, Create Your Unique path and claim the joy you deserve. So how could people get that book and find more about you?
Okay. The book, by the way, was written, the second edition was written in 2015, so it was written before I even started teaching the guided autobiography classes. But they can get my book on Amazon. What I recommend is to go to my author page if you want to see all the books. I've written about 13 books for the trade. You can see all of my books there. Or you can go directly to Amazon and type in my name, Flora Morris Brown, which is probably the best way to type it in. But there is an author page that you go to that each author who wants to sets up. And mine is amazon.com/author/Flora Brown. And that page will show you all of the books that I've written, and it'll have some other a biography and other information, and you just click on the book, the particular book that you want to buy or you want to learn more about, and it'll take you then to the sales page of just that book. And so the Color Your Life Happy is available as a print book and as an ebook, and I had it also as an audiobook until recently. I decided to redo the audio because I hired a narrator before, which was fine, but I decided that I was going to read my own story. At first I didn't want to read the book because it's a long process making a good audio book. But I decided that now that I'm into storytelling and the importance of stories, that reading my happiness book myself would be an additional benefit and treasure for my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to have not only the print book, but have my voice hearing me read my own book. And so I'm going to be doing that this year, and it'll be available. As far as the life stories or anything else I'm doing, my main website is my name, florabrown.com. And when you go there, you can pick off from there to other things. Looking along the navigation bar there at the top, there's information there about all the various things I do. And I urge all of the listeners to get, if you're interested in life stories at all, when you go to my website, I ask you to just ask for the free download. I wrote an ebook called 7 Reasons You Have Trouble Writing Your Life Story. And they can download that and read about what those 7 problems are that people have. We've been talking about them today. But what are some of those problems, and what's the difference between autobiography and memoir and the kind of life stories we do, and so on and so forth. So that free download is a very valuable starting point. And then from there, they have my all of my contact information they'll have on my homepage. If they want to contact me on Facebook, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on, I said that very funny, on Twitter. And then, I know what happened. I don't know. And then any of the social media, the common ones, I'm even on LinkedIn. I don't post there as much as I used to anymore, but Facebook and Twitter for sure. I have a YouTube channel that I haven't added to lately. Got to get back to that. When you're on my website, florabrown.com, if you go to blog and click that, you'll see a lot of the all the blogs that I've put there. All the blogs I've written aren't there. I've been kind of selective because I've been writing blogs since 2008. But one of the main ones that I think you would be interested in, and some of your listeners, is in February, I wrote a blog a day about, I'm going to say famous, but maybe not well-known African Americans for Black History Month. So Black History Month was 29 days this year, so there are 29 different articles, each one spotlighting an African American who contributed to our history in different ways. And I spent a lot of time researching to pull out the key information about them, and you'll see a photograph and a lot of information. Some places I have links. If possible, I'll have a link to them speaking or singing or whatever that they did. So that's over there on my blog. I think you would enjoy that. But I also have articles about the life stories and why they're important and so forth. So FloraBrown.com is kind of a good place to start to get to all of these things.
Fantastic, and I'll definitely check out that month of February. That's right up my alley.
Yeah,
so, yeah
I thought so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so with that, you have just been in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza, Dr. Flora Morris Brown. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Let's definitely stay in touch.
Thank you so very much for having me. It was a fun experience.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.